quorum. Welcome to everybody. I call the meeting to order.
13 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting will take place under a hybrid format, and members are present in person or via Zoom.
Pandemic situation, and in light of the recommendations from health authorities to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person should follow the directives of the Board of Internal Economy. Je remercie d'avance.
I would like to thank all members in advance for their cooperation. I would like to remind everyone that when you speak, please do so slowly and clearly. For those of you who are participating via Zoom, when you're not speaking, please make sure to mute your microphone.
Technical challenges arise, please advise me immediately. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Donc, conformément à la...
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083F and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, the committee resumes its study of Francophone immigration to Canada and Quebec. I would like now to welcome our witnesses. The Commissioner of Official Languages, Raymond Théberge, always a pleasure to have you with us, with Isabelle Gervais, Assistant Commissioner, Compliance Assurance Branch, and Pierre Leduc, Assistant Commissioner, Policy and Communications Branch. Hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to have you back at the committee. And as you know, you have 5 minutes, Mr. Commissioner, for opening remarks. And after that, we will move on to a series of questions. I will let you know when you have about 1 minute left. The floor is now yours, Mr. Commissioner, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members of the committee.
Placed virtually, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of Anishbeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. L'immigration exerce une influence directe sur l'équilibre démolinguistique.
Immigration has a direct influence on the demolinguistic balance between English and French in Canada outside of Quebec. It is good to see that the committee is looking into this key issue. Today, I will tell you about our recent study on the 4.4% immigration target for French-speaking immigrants in Francophone minority communities. Our study primarily consists of a statistical analysis. I'm so sorry, Mr. Commissioner. I'm just going to stop your time. We're asking if you could move your microphone a little bit. It's coming in really loudly for the interpreters. Our study primarily consists of a statistical analysis. And I must stress here that it focuses solely on immigration as a factor influencing the demographic weight of Francophone minority communities. It does not include other factors like low birth rates, aging population, interprovincial mobility, for example, which can all have various degrees of impacts in different regions.
This also deals with only one part of the immigration continuum, the selection and admission of French-speaking permanent residents. It does not address the integration into Francophone minority communities or their retention within those communities. The study shows that even if the 4.4% Francophone immigration target had been consistently met each year since the original 2008 deadline, it would not have been enough to maintain the demographic weight of the French-speaking population outside Quebec, which was the goal, much less contribute to its growth, which was the ideal. According to the 2001 census, this population represented 4.4% of Canadian population outside Quebec. If the target had been met, it could have helped to reduce the decline that we saw in the 2016 census when the demographic weight dropped to 3.8%. Today, almost 20 years after it was set, the target has still not been met. Between 2008, which was the original target deadline, and 2020, the shortfall in admissions of French-speaking permanent residents to Francophone minority communities is upwards of 75,000.
Our study, like many others, noted Francophone minority communities have been experiencing immigration deficits for decades. We're already seeing the demographic impact of this. This also has short and long-term repercussions on the economic, cultural, and social aspects of the community vitality. We've seen the impact of an aging population in many Francophone minority communities where seniors are often older and more vulnerable than seniors in English-speaking majority communities. This is a worrisome effect of immigration deficits within Francophone communities. Extending over more than 20 years, which is an entire generation, this trend of increasing deficits needs to be reversed right now in order to ensure the future of Canada's Francophone communities outside of Quebec. Meanwhile, Francophone minority communities across the country are keen to attract, welcome, and support all newcomers.
And do better. In our study, I recommended that Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada conduct a full analysis of the current target and its impact in order to help define a new, higher one. I also call on the federal government to adopt a policy on immigration to Francophone minority communities. I'm very pleased that the new version of the long-awaited bill to modernize the Official Languages Act has been tabled and is now a reality. Bill C-13 recognizes immigration as one of the factors that contribute to maintaining or increasing the demographic weight of French linguistic minority communities. It also requires the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration to adopt a policy on Francophone immigration, including objectives, targets, and indicators, to enhance the vitality of French linguistic minority communities in Canada.
Given the importance of immigration for Francophone minority communities, I will be studying the new obligations in Bill C-13 to make sure that they provide the best possible results for the communities. Francophone immigration is still very much a current topic. It's reassuring to see numerous initiatives being organized across the country to support immigration to Francophone minority communities, and I sincerely hope that all of these efforts will yield results for these communities and their determination to grow and thrive. Thank you for your attention. I will be happy to take your questions in the official language of your choice.
I will be happy to answer your questions in the official language of your choice.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Commissaire. En dedans des...
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. You've respected the 5 minutes. We're going to ask you to bring your microphone down a little bit. It's very sensitive, and we're hearing your breath in the microphone. So if you can put it lower on your chin. Let's try this. The first round of questions will come from the first Vice Chair of the Standing Committee, Joël Godin. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us. You know, Mr. Commissioner, I have a question for you. You mentioned a few points that could affect the presence of Francophones in minority settings, and immigration is one of them. Can you tell us, in order of priority, where immigration stands to fill this gap, if I could use this expression, with regards to Francophones outside of Quebec? I would say that when we're trying to maintain the demographic weight of Francophone communities outside of Quebec compared to the English majority, for me, the main factor is immigration. And also, in the wider Canadian context, immigration is the key factor to make sure that our population grows in the country. So it's the same thing for Francophones as well. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. You talked about Bill C-13. It's the new bill that was tabled on March 1st. It recognizes the importance of immigration. Now, you've also stated that in this bill, it mentions a point about the Department of Immigration that should adopt a policy that includes indicators. Mr. Commissioner, I understand that in the bill, we're asking immigration to have a policy, indicators, and targets, but where is the obligation to deliver results? Well, I think it would be interesting to see in C-13 some more specificity about this. I think it's also important to recognize that we're in an urgent situation with regards to the decline of French populations. So we'll need stronger measures. I think we'll need a French immigration policy specifically to develop our minority communities. So we need to build up what's already mentioned in the bill. We also have to have a system of reporting that should happen every year. Thank you. Now, quickly, can you tell us whether or not the bill that was tabled by the Minister of Official Language has enough teeth? I would say that compared to the law as it exists now, I would say that it has a lot more teeth, especially with regards to the role for the commissioner. You said it has more teeth. Do you think it could have even more teeth? Well, it would be very interesting to see if we talk about administrative sanctions and monetary sanctions would be one approach. It would be important to think about the various powers that could be applied to Part 7. We've been thinking about these aspects, and we're going to come back with stronger positions when it comes to when work begins on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Another question. In Bill C-13, you have more powers. But let's talk about immigration. Let me give you a specific example. Currently, you have extra powers to get transportation companies to serve travelers in both languages. So here's an example. In Regina, an airport that has to meet the stipulations of the Official Languages Act, if the airport is doing everything they can to find bilingual staff, to hire francophones, to try and respect the Official Languages Act, what happens if there is not enough Francophone immigration to fill these positions? What will you do then? How will you treat this organization that did everything they could? They've demonstrated all of their efforts, but they're unable to attract Francophones to meet the requirements that are built into the Act. What would you do as commissioner? This is a hypothetical situation, and it's difficult for me to speculate. But what's important is to make sure that our communities, our Francophone minority communities, should be able to attract a sufficient number of Francophone immigrants to make sure there's a sizable enough population to fulfill these positions. As I said in my presentation, the decline of French has an impact on economy, the culture, and on services. So we need to make sure that we have strong immigration to these communities. Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, imagine you have a magic wand and you want to correct the decline of French in Quebec. What would you do? If we're talking specifically about an immigration policy, I think it's important to have a tailor-made policy that is tailor-made for communities. So we need much more ambitious targets than what we've seen in the past, but also we have to give ourselves the tools and the resources to meet these targets. Mr. Commissioner, I'm so sorry. A more ambitious target, what would that be if not 4.4%? It could be 7, 8, 9%. But I think that before we set this target, we have to identify what the gaps are. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Before we continue with the questions, the bells will ring at about 6:34. Do we have unanimous consent to continue until we have 5 minutes left? Because I think everyone can vote remotely. Is this correct? No one's voting at the House? So do we have unanimous consent to continue while the bells are ringing? Yes, Mr. Chair, but first we should establish how much time we should stop. We should allow for the votes. 5 minutes? That works for me, Mr. Chair. Does everyone agree? I see no one shaking their head, so let's continue. Mr. Commissioner, the next round of question is from Patricia Latanzio. You have 6 minutes, Madame Latanzio.
Commissioner, always a pleasure to see you amongst us. With regards to your study, the one that's entitled "A Francophone Immigration Target Outside of Quebec that has yet to be reached in 2023 deadline," that you released in November 2021, what are the ongoing challenges that you see that we're not able to meet the target?
Well, there are a number of challenges I think that we've identified in the study. And our study focused on permanent residents, Francophone residents. There are a number of pathways in the immigration pathways. And I think we have issues in a number of these pathways. For example, the economic immigrant class, we should be focusing on a Francophone immigrant class. We have a significant number of refugees that come to Canada and establish themselves in Francophone communities. It is a very important source of immigration. So when we think in terms of refugee policy, we have to think in terms also of how we meet our official languages commitments with respect to the communities. I also think we have issues in terms of international students, in terms of study permits, in terms of how we can transition from temporary to permanent. I also think we have issues in terms of recruitment, frankly, in terms of where we look for immigrants, we try to find immigrants. We know where there are significant pools of Francophone speakers, whether it's Sub-Saharan Africa, Northern Africa, and I think we have to look at those particular regions and try to focus in a way that we can have a strategy which allows us to basically go where the Francophones are. And there are probably other issues with respect to Francophone immigration. There's issues around testing, language testing. But I also think that in the past, we have not put together the kind of global plan to attack specifically Francophone immigration. It's always been, in my view, sort of an add-on to other programs. So we have to be more specific and more targeted in how we do things.
I understand. And so I think that your input in terms of what you would like to see in the Francophone immigration strategy policy could be of usefulness to us. And perhaps your report may indicate us in that direction. And if there are any other measures that you would think or any other ideas, please do submit them to us in this committee, and we would most likely study that and also forward it to the immigration minister. I know that the idea at this committee also came that we were, a member had suggested doing a sort of like we don't go to them, like immigrants don't come to them, we will go to you, and sort of like, have people from the government go in different countries to be able to alleviate the very expensive sums of money that sometimes people have to expend to be able to make a request and come here in Canada. And so that, that work is done on foreign territory. And I wanted to know what your opinion on that would be.
Well, we have in place, certain recruitment strategies that whether it's...
Pardon, Monsieur le Commissaire, oui. Madame Lattanzio, j'arrête le temps. Les interprètes nous demandent cette fois-ci d'éloigner.
Sorry, I have to stop the time. Please, could you please move the mic between your mouth and your nose? Are you speaking to me or to the Commissioner? 3 minutes have gone by. It's too close to your mouth, your mic. There's a lot of noise. Is it better now? I hope. Keep talking.
To the question, we have in place a certain way of doing business, and I think we've been doing it the same way for a long...
Excusez-moi, parfait, on recommence.
Perfect. 3 minutes, 38 seconds have gone by.
We have in place a number of strategies that have been used for many years, and maybe one of the ways is how do we actually recruit on the ground. I'm not an expert in recruiting or how we recruit immigrants, but I think it's important that we reach out in those regions where there are important numbers of Francophone speakers who have an interest in moving to Canada.
And what role do provinces play in obtaining the targets?
Well, immigration is a shared jurisdiction, and the kinds of relationship that the province has with the federal government varies greatly from province to province, as you know.
Mhm.
Quebec and the federal government have their own agreements.
Right.
So I think it's important that when there are discussions between various jurisdictions, that we take into consideration the Francophone minorities. In other words, when we talk about nomination programs, we talk about numbers in nomination programs, we should be thinking in terms of what also are the needs of the Francophone communities. So I think since it's shared jurisdiction, it's important that both parties play an active role in promoting Francophone immigration in their province or territory.
Okay. And with regards to obligation, my colleague mentions obligation of a result. I would like to bring you along the obligation of means, l'obligation des moyens. Donc, est-ce que la politique ou les questions...
The questions that were put to you to attract Francophone immigration, in your opinion, should that be an obligation of means or an obligation of outcomes? I think we need to give ourselves the means to match our ambitions. Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Latanzio. You had 20 seconds left. Now we shall move on to the next round of questions now by the second vice chair of the Standing Committee, Mr. Mario Bolio. You have 6 minutes. Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you for being here. What do you think about this? Outside Quebec, the assimilation rate for Franc is about 100%, 90%. And people like Charles Castonguay say that whether it's people from outside or those from Quebec who are settling in other parts of the country, the transfer rate is higher. So to attract Francophone immigration is like trying to fill a bucket of water that has holes. What do you think? When you talk about demography, if we don't come up with the real actions and use different resources, outcomes will not change. When we talk about Francophone immigration, it's not only about recruitment, but also integration and retention. When we talk about integration, we have to make sure that there's access to employment, access to accommodation, and access to education in the minority language. So if we do not introduce such tools, such programs to ensure proper integration and attraction of Francophone immigrants, it is possible that they would go towards a majority or towards other regions of the country. We've often seen that retention also involves proper support for our Francophone immigrants, so that when they leave New Brunswick to go to Quebec, they shouldn't encounter problems. I believe that we should come up with robust programs that will provide the right results. Several studies have shown that for newcomers to be integrated, it should be done when they come. If they come to a region with a mass of Francophones, that the chances are higher that they will integrate. Is it not preferable to target the Acadian Peninsula, for example, or regions where there's a mass of Francophones already, to ensure that they stay there and that they settle in those regions? What I've seen throughout the country now, and this for a number of years, is the diversity within our Francophone community outside Quebec. For example, in Manitoba, we hear more about the Manitoba Francophonie. So that's not my question. That's not my question. What I'm saying is that all communities can receive immigrants. Conversely, we know that in Quebec, the Canada-Quebec agreement that allows Quebec to select its own category of immigrants, employment immigrants, has allowed them to select more Francophone immigrants from Francophone countries. And that is why language transfers have increased towards French for some time, because there was already linguistic transfers towards French, and we still see this in Quebec. But since 2015, the proportion of Francophone immigrants has dropped a lot, because immigration mostly come from students with temporary visas and temporary working visas. Don't you think that it's better to promote Francophone immigration in Quebec as well? Quebec and the federal government have an agreement that is negotiated between these two administrations. And I think that Quebec is better placed to know its demographic needs, and we consider the opinions when we set immigration targets nationally. On the contrary, the temporary student permits, from what we've seen in the news recently, we have some countries that constitute the main pool of Francophone countries: Algeria, Francophone Africa. The refusal rate for these temporary visas is about 80% or more. Often, for these students to apply to come to Quebec, they must have an institution confirm their French. They must have received an approval letter from Quebec, and very often they don't receive this. So Quebec is not directly involved. So how can you explain these very high refusal rates when they are coming from Francophone countries? Students who are asking for temporary permits and they are coming from African countries, how can you explain that the refusal rate is a lot higher when they want to settle in Quebec than in a Francophone university elsewhere? There's really a problem here. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Maybe that will be for the next round. The next question will come from Ms. Ashton. Ms. Nikki Ashton, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Good morning to the Commissioner. It's an honor to have you before our committee. My first question, once again, has to do with Africa. You mentioned earlier and also in your report that you want to target Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where 68% of the Francophones can be found. But Carole Jolin testified before this committee under a previous study saying that in sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes candidates have to cross 6 countries to apply. We were told that there's a flagrant lack of visa offices. In light of those testimonies, is the government doing enough to recruit Francophone immigrants? Should we change our approach towards Africa? Should we increase? Is an increase in the visa offices part of the solution? If we want to obtain different results, we need to act differently. I remember that when we talked about student visas, everything was done in Dakar. Everybody had to travel to Dakar. And this led to lots of difficulties for foreign students. If we want to target sub-Saharan Africa, and this is a potential pool, once again, we need to come up with the necessary tools. Do we need more visa offices? I'm not an expert. I'm not an immigration expert, but I would say that when we want to serve customers, it's a good idea to be closer to those clients or customers. So that's one way of addressing the issue. Thank you. Another question. The FCA tells us that to maintain the current target of Francophones, by 2036, we need to increase the target to 8%, the target you described as ambitious. At the same time, immigrants from Africa encounter many difficulties during the immigration process. You say that it will take a Francophone immigration policy. Do we need a different policy to reach objectives that will enable us to reach our targets, for example, by accepting more students, particularly from Africa? I prefer to refer to the concept of real equality. With this concept, we need a different program to make sure that a community is able to reach the other, to get to the level of the other. When we talk about Francophone immigration, we need a different program. How should we do this concretely? That's something else. Clearly, what we're doing now is not working. And if we come up with an 8% target, yes, it's ambitious because we've never even reached the 4.4% target. In my opinion, we will need to come up with a different approach to make sure that we are heading towards real equality when it comes to immigration. Thank you. Still connected to that and to other conversations we had in this committee, we all know that there's a lack of workforce, particularly in the area of education, including childhood, infant education. In your opinion, is it desirable for the IRCC to give priority to Francophone workers who can provide more services in French throughout Canada? Once again, what is important is that everybody realizes that there is a shortage of a bilingual workforce throughout the country in the area of childhood education, healthcare. There is a flagrant lack of staff. This is something we've also seen in other areas. Some category of employees are favored, and I think this will respond to a specific need, and that is what we need to do. Concerning language test, have you heard testimonies from Francophone immigrants? We raised this issue because we had the opportunity in committee to identify the problem of the difficulty of this test, even for Francophones who have spoken French and worked in French throughout their life. Very disturbing testimony. Why are candidates failing? Do you think that these tests are very difficult or even poorly designed? Based on testimonies we all heard, we have heard many things about the test. The cost, access to the test, the quality of the test. And the question we must ask is, if we are now questioning those tests, are they meeting the needs of those who have to take those tests? That's the question we need to ask.
Je pense que mon temps est à 1 minute.
I think I have 1 minute left. Thank you, Mr. Theberge. We appreciate emphasis being placed on Francophone communities throughout Canada, like in Manitoba.
Considéré par le fédéral, mais qui mérite beaucoup plus.
We are not considered by the federal government.
Continuer avec le deuxième tour.
Before we continue, I'm being told that the entire technical team are ready to work for 2 hours in spite of the vote. Is that okay?
Qui sera important.
We have a lot of work coming up. Can we do 2 hours? Mr. Godin?
À 6h moins 5,
Unfortunately, I have to leave early. I have another meeting at 6, if possible.
I'd have to leave at 5 to 6. Does anyone else have to leave earlier than that? No, it's the same thing for me, Mr. Chair. I have the same assignment as Mr. Godin at 6. I have to go give a speech at about 5:30 or 5:45 in the House. Okay, then I recommend that we do another round of questions, and then we would thank the Commissioner for being here, and then we would move into our committee work. What do you think? Absolutely, Mr. Chair. That works for me. I'm happy with that suggestion. I don't want to speak for my other colleagues. I see thumbs up everywhere. That's perfect. Mr. Commissioner, I'm sorry, these are the things that happen in committees. Next round of questions will come from our newest member, Mr. Lehoux. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. My first question, Mr. Chair, considering what my colleague said, you said the target should be increased to about 6, 7, 8%. What is the basis of those targets of 6, 7, or 8%? Calculation was based on the deficiencies that we have now between the 4.4 and the number we want to attain, let's say 200,000. To get to that number, we need to increase the percentage significantly. There's another factor that comes to play as well. Canada wants to increase the global target from 300 to 410 to 450. This is going to be an even greater challenge when it comes to attaining the target. The target should be a minimum. I think other witnesses will come with greater analysis, statistical analysis to answer your question, but I think that's a minimum. The challenge we will have is that when the number of immigrants increases significantly, how can we meet that target? Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the number is increasing significantly. Now, with immigration, that question was already asked, immigration from Francophone countries like African countries. How do you explain this, Mr. Commissioner, that there's a high rate of refusal? We had numbers of 80% refusal rate. How can you explain this very high refusal rate? It's difficult to explain. They talked about a software. I do not necessarily understand the logic behind these refusals. We are hearing answers like everyone else. I remember when I worked with international institutions, there were challenges as well. So it's difficult for me to identify the problem. We are waiting for the department to give us answers. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Does the department give you figures? It's good to come up with percentages for refusals, but what are the elements that they give you? Do they give you reasons? We have not explored that question with IRCC to date. Mr. Commissioner, do you think it's better to explore the situation? Because with an 80% refusal rate, it's something that we need to know if we need to improve the situation of Francophone immigration.
This is a point that warrants to be studied. I think in the next steps of the work around the targets, we'll be able to identify strategies and programs to implement, and this is something we should look into. Because this is a really important avenue. Foreign students, whether they're coming to Quebec or the rest of Canada, are important. So, Mr. Commissioner, is this something that you have planned for in your mandate to be able to obtain such answers more quickly? Can you answer both yes or no? Not for now. Not for now? Okay. Let's move on to another topic. Let's talk about Francophone immigration in rural areas. Do you have any statistics that you can share that would guide us? Because we know that demand is high. Rural areas all over Canada want to welcome these people. Do you have any data to provide us? I don't have specific numbers on rural areas, but something we did put in place throughout the country is called welcoming communities. These are often in rural areas. So these programs welcome Francophone immigrants in more rural areas. They provide them with support to integrate the community. In some of our provinces, rural life is life. And the demographic decline is even more important there. Oftentimes, they have more urgent labor shortages. So again, I think we have to find solutions that meet the needs in these areas. I think that before we stop, I'm sorry, my time seems to be up. I just want to, can we get those numbers? Mr. Chair, I'm just asking for the numbers. Point of order, Mr. Chair. There's a bit of a delay with the translation. Well, my colleague was just asking the commissioner to provide these numbers in writing. I understood, but as you know, at the end of the meeting, I always ask witnesses to send their information in writing. The next questions will come from the Parliamentary Secretary to the Official Languages Minister, Marc Serré. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have a big heart. Continue with your excellent work, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Thibert, for being here. I think this is the second time in just a short time, and it's always a pleasure to hear your recommendations. Earlier, you were talking about C13 and how it has a little bit more power. You also said that C13 will include elements that touch on immigration. Do you think it's important for the committee to look into C13 quickly in the next few days, or do you think we could wait a few months to study C13? Well, I believe we need to study it as soon as possible. Mr. Chair, point of order. Point of order. Mr. Chair, the witness is here for the study on immigration. Thank you. You've answered my question. It's very important. Immigration is a part of C13, so thank you for saying that we need to study this as soon as possible. I would like to look into your recommendations on immigration. What would the roles of the provinces be? You discussed a shared responsibility between the federal government and the provincial governments. I think the Ontario has a nomination program that touches 8,000 people. Do you work with the provinces? And what role do you think the federal government should play to make sure that provinces do their part to increase Francophone immigration? Well, we don't work with the provinces on immigration. But one thing is clear. This is a shared jurisdiction, as everyone knows. So when it comes to shared jurisdiction, it's important for the provinces to be conscious of the needs in their communities. When we set numbers for specific categories. So it's important for the provinces to be aware of their needs. It's also important for the federal government to ask the right questions to understand community needs. So for me, this is part and parcel of a proactive approach that has positive measures and that has a discerning approach to arrive at true equality. But, you know, we are in a federation, so there are different areas of jurisdiction, but we need the different levels of government to cooperate. In the same idea on positive measures and being proactive, We heard Mrs. Ashton speaking about shortages in teaching. We talked about national associations and how important they all are. Do you have any recommendations? Did you work with provincial associations for teachers, early childhood education, etc.? And in this way, we can target the shortage of Francophone teachers. We did a study in 2019, and we had identified the shortage of FSL teachers and also of French as a first language teaching. This really affects the entire education continuum. We've spoken to many organizations about this shortage. At the time, we had asked for greater coordination, and this is actually being done to make sure that we could invest in education on this front. It's also important to think about how we can find ways to recruit teachers, educators from other countries, but then also to find ways to help them acclimate to the Canadian cultural context, which is so important. As someone who worked in education, in our classrooms in Canada, there is a specific culture, and we need newcomers to integrate this pedagogical culture. So we have to do as much as we can because there is such a great, dire need in Francophone education throughout the country. I have 15 seconds left, so first I'll thank you, and then if you could send the committee. Can you send the study that you did with agencies throughout Canada? Can you tell us how much funding goes to Francophone agencies? Thank you, Mr. Serré. Your time is up. Mr. Serré, you're tight on time. As you know, we have to start committee work. So the next question is from Mr. Beaulieu. You have 2.5 minutes. Mr. Commissioner, there is a witness that appeared before us that had a lot of difficulty with IRCC in Montreal. He was forbidden from trying his cases in French, even though his clients had asked for that. When his clients speak to immigration staff in French and then they get answers in English, is this something you can look into? There used to be very little work to be done in Quebec with the two minorities, but does C-13 give you the better tools to look into this question in Quebec? I think the commissioner has the power to investigate and to launch its own investigations. I'm aware of this situation. We've heard about it often. We understand that immigration offices in Montreal in particular, where there is Anglophone staff. This is something that concerns me greatly. It really is up to IRCC to look into this and find solutions as fast as possible. It is unacceptable that someone cannot be served in the official language of their choice, especially in areas that are designated as bilingual. Yes, this lawyer was telling us that the situation is getting worse. It's getting worse and worse. IRCC doesn't seem to be able to look into its own operations. We asked witnesses all sorts of questions to IRCC, and they weren't able to provide answers. Why can they never meet their Francophone immigration targets? And this has been the case for 20 years. They didn't know. So, things aren't looking great. So would you be able to go look into the operations at IRCC to see what the problem is? When you talk about IRCC, are you talking about something in particular? Well, the Department of Immigration, the Immigration Office in Montreal, but also the people who are choosing applicants, who are denying student visas, and so on and so forth. So, Mrs. Ashton, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. My question for the Commissioner is this. I would like to talk about French services. Do you think the federal government is investing enough in French language training? There are many services that are only offered in English, so people almost always choose English language lessons outside of Quebec. Should we provide more French education outside of Quebec? Well, you know, Canada has 2 official languages. When you become a Canadian citizen, during the ceremony, we recognize the linguistic duality in both official languages. If we want to welcome immigrants in the official language of their choice and we want to give them a true choice, it's important, it's actually fundamental that they should have access to language training in the language of their choice. Let's talk about immigration in C-13. The bill suggests that the government should give itself a French immigration target, but it doesn't define it. Do you think we should define the targets? Do you think we should revise the demographic weight in Canada as it was in 2001 when we started setting targets for ourselves? I think that we should give ourselves the objective of 4.4% Francophone immigration, but I think we should be even more ambitious and surpass it. We should talk about growth and not just maintenance. It's obvious to me that 4.4% is the minimum, not a maximum. And I think that when we create an action plan for immigration, we should set an ambitious target, and we have to recognize that if we mean to reach the targets, we have to equip ourselves with the tools and resources we need. We shouldn't always take inspiration from the past. The past has shown us that we have not done a great job of reaching our targets. I don't think I have any time left, so I would like to thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mrs. Ashton. Given the time and that it's 5 minutes before the vote, the following questions are coming from Jacques Gourde and Mr. Iacono. You'll each have 3.5 minutes to be fair. Mr. Gourde, you have 3.5 minutes and the floor. Mr. Gourde is not here. I will speak for him, Mr. Chair, if you'll allow it. Mr. Commissaire Théberge, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's fantastic for you to be here. What do you think a strong presence, strong Francophone presence community is in Canada, and what does that look like? I can answer this way. I think about it in terms of ethno-linguistic vitality. What is a community? A community is a group of people and institutions. It's a group of people and institutions that share values. I would say that we have communities all over the country, and they have institutions that function in French, that have services in French, and that want to continue to thrive in French. So when I think about a Francophone community, it's a community that identifies as Francophone and that gives itself the tools to live in French in that community. So that's my definition. It's not based on numbers. And I think that we have to see vitality in terms of institutional networks, culture, education, and other indicators. Are you thinking of sending a list to the government of high concentration Francophone areas? No one has ever asked me to provide such a list. We have no intention of doing it. It's never been our intention to provide that type of information. The Minister of Immigration was here on Monday and said he was very close of reaching the 3% of the 4.4% that we've been trying to reach in the last 30 years. So he thought that by 2022, he could reach 3% and even 4.4% in 2023. Do you believe this is realistic? It would be hard to reach. And even if we did reach it once every 20 years, I don't think that that really means meeting the target. There's ambiguity about the target. Is this an annual target or is it a target over 20 years? I think it should be annual. But if we somehow manage to touch on that 4.4% once, I don't think we can say that we met the target that we set for ourselves in 2001. Well, I'm happy to hear you say that because we keep talking about raising the objective. If we're going to receive greater numbers of immigrants in Canada, if we increase the target to 8 or 10% while hoping that we could try and just reach 5%, we've never even reached 4%, maybe we would have stronger means to get there and avail ourselves of the necessary resources to reach these targets. By welcoming a greater number of immigrants, generally speaking, if we want to reach a target, whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%, the challenge is growing and the resources need to be even greater. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. Mr. Iaconou, you have the floor for 3.5 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Commissioner. To reach this target of 4.4% between 2008 and 2020, Canada would have had to admit 75,000 more permanent residents that speak French outside of Quebec. According to you, what should the target be as of 2024 in the years to come? What would be the number of immigrants, of residents? The number would depend on the federal objective. Inaudible. Mr. the Commissioner, according to you, what would you suggest? Well, I don't have numbers right now. What I'm hoping for is a percentage that is beyond 4.4%. We need something much more ambitious than what is set there now. And the absolute number needs to increase by a percentage of the general target. So you said earlier that we should do things differently. I thought that was great that you said that. So in the face of this decline, what should we be doing? What should the government do to maintain long-term settlement of new permanent residents who are Francophone, who choose to live in minority language communities? We have integration programs in place, settlement programs, and I think they need to be beefed up. We have to make sure we create a connection between the community and newcomers. Because if we can't create these connections, what we'll see is that they'll go to other communities. So it's important that they are properly integrated in the community. It's one thing to say that we need more workers, but it's another thing to say that we want them to be well integrated, that they're welcomed, and that they are a part of the community. I think that if we have the tools necessary, if we have the programs that are necessary, we can get better levels of retention. This is important because we're investing a lot in the attraction of newcomers, but we also have to have programs to keep them there.
We have organizations in place, but do they have the tools to do their job? That's the question. Should we say that this takes a strong collaboration between the provincial governments as well as the federal government? It takes collaboration between the federal government, the provinces, and the communities. I think it's a partnership that starts from the grassroots to get to a holistic approach to ensure retention and proper integration of immigrants in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Iaconou. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Leduc, Madame Gervais. Thank you for being here today. Do not hesitate to send us any information. you should send us, you have to send us more information in writing via the clerk. But if you think there's anything else that you would like us to know, please do not hesitate to send us any such information relating to the questions you were asked. That being said, we have to adjourn to go vote. Dear colleagues, we have to come back for committee business with the second Zoom address we received from the clerk today. So the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, everyone.